George.
Yes.
I'm going to go ahead and call on you to start us with the prayer so that we can get this party started.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
O heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of truth, who are everywhere present and filling all things, the treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and dwell in us, cleanse us of every stain, and save our souls, O gracious one.
Amen. Well, thank you. It's 4:36 Eastern Standard Time, so I'm going to get started, and whoever joins in on Greek time. Let's see. You have all sort of seen a little bit about Steve and the biographical information that I sent him, or that I sent out to the team. And I want to thank Steve Tibbs for joining our video conference today and really leading it. Steve is with the metropolis of San Francisco and has worked with parishes all over, I want to say the West, really, San Francisco and Denver metropolises, helping them with strategic plans and leadership development within their parishes. And like I said, he's been gracious enough to join us this afternoon, and I thank him for that. Steve, I'm not going to drag it out much longer, and I'll kind of hand it off to you.
Great. Thanks, Stacy. I appreciate it. Well, welcome, everyone. You'll see that I'm wearing a sweater because in California, it's in my hometown here in Yorba Linda, it's dipped all the way down to 65. So we're bundling up and not knowing what to do outside. So that's why I'm wearing a sweater.
Understandable.
Well, it's a pleasure to share some of the learnings that I've been able to capture over the last few years working with parishes in developing strategic plans, working with leadership teams specifically in the area of leader development as well. I think you probably saw my bio. So my professional background has been in this area as well. So it's really a blessing to be able to take those professional skills and apply them within our church, and to return back some of the gifts which have been bestowed upon me to honor Christ in his church. You probably have seen the materials, Stacy, that Stacy sent out. And when I talk about strategic planning, that'll be the fundamental focus of my discussion today. It's extremely important to understand the context and the setting of which the strategic plan occurs. So what I'd like to do is spend a little bit of time on the approach of working with a parish and some of the things parishes think about when they're considering doing a strategic plan. I do have a list of common questions that I will use as a foundation to go through, because they indeed are common. Just about every time I'm in a parish or speaking with a parish group, these questions do come up in terms of points of curiosity and concern sometimes within a parish. And then finally, I will share with you the step-by-steps of a strategic plan process. Won't go into that tremendous detail because that would just take too much time, and it is more of a visual thing. So with that, I think that Stacy, are you going to be manning the questions if they come in on a chat? Okay, that'll be fine. So let me share with you some experience that I've had with strategic planning. One of the first things that I found to be very beneficial is, before the strategic planning process even begins, it's to set the context and understanding of why is the parish there? What is the purpose of a parish? To get a common definition of that, because as we know, if you have 15 parish council members or 9 or 6 or whatever, those are all different perspectives which can be brought in. So typically in a strategic planning process, we'll first start with that. It's a discussion of, why are we here as a parish? What is the purpose of the parish? And I underscore the term why. We'll go through I think if you will, concentric circles. On the outer ring is the who. the middle ring is the what, and the inner ring is the why. And this ties in specifically to stewardship messaging as well. So if you look at the who, the outer ring, that would be a conversation where someone, and many of you have probably been in this conversation, where someone would say, who are you? What is your church? And we'll get a variety of answers. We'll hear, we're Greek Orthodox, we're Orthodox Christian, we're the ancient church, we're the church which, Christ started. We'll get those labels put on us. And sometimes when we're talking about stewardship, and sometimes in outreach, and sometimes in evangelism as well, sometimes we stop there and assume the person knows more than they really know. And that happens in parishes as well sometimes. So we want to avoid just the labeling, and that will tell you also, depending on how a parish answers that, what their emphasis is. Is their emphasis more on the Greek than the Orthodox? There are some parishes that view themselves as very pan-Orthodox and focus on the Orthodox Church perspective. So once you go in from the who, which is the outer ring and a very visible ring, then you get into the what. And those are the questions of, what do you do? What are our ministries? What are our programs? What are our services? And many times parishes will think that the strategic planning process focuses in on that middle ring. It's the things that we do. And you might say, again, talking to somebody outside the parish, you might say, well, we have youth programs, we have stewardship programs, we have senior programs, we have church school, we have Bible studies, and we start listing off all the things that we do, in thinking that in some way that defines us. It gives parameters around us, but it really doesn't define us. And many times when we're talking to parishioners, both from a stewardship and an outreach or evangelism perspective, we will stop there and say, doesn't this sound great? In fact, would you like to come see what we're about and join us? At that point, quite frankly, we don't really set ourselves apart from any other church out there, because we haven't gotten to our richness yet. And our richness is that inner circle that says, why are we here? Why does this parish exist? And why, as we as Orthodox Christians, why do we do what we do? And so you have to examine the role of a parish. And not to get too far into this, there are some key descriptors that typically come up when I do a facilitation with parishes. And ultimately, most parishes will center around the why of a parish. Why are we here? Is to bring people closer to God. And we bring people closer to God through the Eucharist, through our connections with one another, that in a parish, we are very connected, both ministries, interpersonally, families, socially, with one another. So if you understand and agree that the fundamental purpose is to bring people closer to God, to encourage their journey, to support their journey, the journey of theosis, trying to draw closer to God, then one can branch that out and say, God is here, this house is holy, therefore this parish is holy, and by definition, the parish is just not the sanctuary. It's all of the grounds. From the second you step in off the street, if you're in Columbus, Ohio, somebody that steps in and pulls into our parking lot, they are now in the sacred ground, the holy ground of Christ. And many times in our thinking, we allow ourselves to believe that Christ only is in the church. He's in every hallway. And I know this is some basic things, but you'd be surprised how sometimes people forget about these things. So once we establish that basis of why are we here, then you can branch it out to say, if all that we have is from God, and these grounds and everything that we have is holy, then we have an obligation as stewards to be effective, to effectively use and grow, maybe even protect the gifts which have been bestowed upon us. Now that sounds very much like a stewardship message, and the reality it is, because all these programs and titles that we have for our different ministries really all do weave together in this tapestry of supporting one another's and supporting Christ's church. So if we can get that definition and I understand that every parish will be a little bit different, but if we get that definition in place of why are we a parish, then we can establish ourselves to have the next conversation, which is, how healthy are we? Do we have a healthy, flourishing, thriving parish? Or are we stagnant? So one of the things to look at is to have that conversation, to look at the parish life cycle and say, where are we on this curve? Are we green and growing and we're going up that bell curve to stretch ourselves and develop more? Have we plateaued at the top of the bell curve? And that plateau can maybe take 2, 3, 5, 10 years in some cases. Or have we gone down the backside? And are we beginning to slide and decline? And we define, what does it mean to grow? What does it mean to decline? Now, mind you, all these sort of things are happening even before a strategic plan occurs. The reason for that is because I'm not an advocate of doing a plan for planning's sake. A plan should be purposeful in order to hopefully expect some sort of an outcome. And that outcome many times is seen through a new energy, through new programs, through the enablement of the primary purpose of the parish, which is to help people grow closer to God. As a matter of fact, one of the activities we go through as part of the strategic planning process, when we do that, the parish health check, is ask the question, take any ministry, take any program or service, and put to bring people closer to God after that. So, youth programs to bring people closer to God, stewardship to bring people closer to God, religious education to bring people closer to God. There has not been one parish where we've done this, and then I've asked the question, if you put this into action, would your parish be different today, or excuse me, different tomorrow than it is today? And absolutely every one of them says, if that was in our conscious behaviors, we would be different. So with that then, we start to take a look at the culture of the parish, not ethnicity, but the collective behaviors and practices that form the activities, beliefs, and norms within a parish. That operating culture, not to sound too consultant-ease, but that culture within a parish will also drive and influence the design of the strategy as well. So if we look at, again, the whys. Oh, you got it there. Okay. If you go to the next slide there, Stacy, that'd be great. Excellent, thank you. So if we go to the, we've identified the whys, we all have agreement on that. We identified the parish health. Then we say, how do we get to the point of growing our situation, of improving our situation? And there are two pathways fundamentally that we look at. One is through leader development, and one is through strategic planning. And we have dialogues on that. Now, what I've just chronicled for you is about a 3.5 to 4 hour workshop with a group of parish leaders. That parish leaders typically runs in the size of about a dozen or so. Some have gone up to 60, and it's just a little different approach. But the reality is that we have conversations about this. So never do a plan for planning's sake. Do a plan that's going to be purposeful, meaningful, and try to provide some defined outcome at the end of it. So for today, we'll focus in on the pathway of strategic planning. And the other thing too that is very important when we're studying parish health and talking about health, as you know, being the head of stewardship programs, people are far more inclined to give to programs, churches, nonprofits, whatever the case might be, that are healthy and growing. There are very few donors that want to come in and save a situation that's in rapid decline or slow erosion. It minimizes their efforts, grows their frustration, and as we all know in stewardship programs as well, there are so many opportunities to give to really good, solid organizations out there that the opportunities to give are vast and easy to do. So I hate to use the term competition, but there is competition for giving out there I'm sure you are keenly aware. So if we establish that healthy parish as something that we want to focus on, identify what those parameters are, and then again, identify your pathway, which is leader development or strategic planning. With that, I want to pause for a second. Are there any questions about what I've just shared with you before we do a little deeper dive into the strategic planning pathway?
Ironically, as I have shared the slides, my ability to see our chat function has disappeared.
I can see it.
Okay.
Yeah, can you see it at the bottom, the footer on your slide there? If you move your arrow onto the slides, does it pop up down below?
It does not.
Okay.
I mean, let's as Steve said, let's pause for just a minute. Is there anybody who wants to ask a question thus far of Steve and what he's presented? I know he's giving us a lot of information today.
Yeah.
Stacy, my chat went away also, but when I clicked chat at the bottom, it came back up again.
Okay.
Yeah, if you drag over the footer, you can probably see it pop up.
Okay. Well, you know what, Steve, for now, go ahead and continue, unless you see any questions.
No, we're good.
Okay.
All right. So, and again, if you have questions at any time, feel free to ask. I can amend this presentation any way you wish. So let's look at the common questions which typically arise when talking about strategic planning. And the first one is, how do you define strategic planning? And that's an excellent question that typically comes up, and you might have it as well. So from a perspective of a strategic plan, typically I will be looking at the 3 to 4 year window and all the activities from years 0 to that period would constitute the development of a strategic plan. There are some plans that go out beyond 3 to 4 years. Some go to 5, some go to 10. But given the speed of our society today, the fact that technology has sped up our learning cycles, most strategic plans now are in the 36 to 48 month window, but probably more of them in the 24 to 36 month window, which is a little concerning because depending on what comes out, it might be very difficult to make some change in 24 months, especially if you have a building program involved. But that's how I define strategic planning. Now, not to be confused with an operations plan. An operations plan is basically a 1 year plan, and there is one parish, for example, I was just at last weekend, that wanted to learn about strategic planning, but by the time we were finished dialoguing, what they really want is a 1 year plan, because they have never done a plan ever. And this is a parish that's been around for many, many decades, and they identified that they're actually not very good at it. So we're going to take an approach of developing a good, solid 1 year plan that will culminate in the development of their annual budget, which will all be presented to the General Assembly in the fall, because they had never tied their annual budget to any programs, ministries, or services of the parish. Their planning process was more around, let's just increase it 3%, and then, we're good to go. And then when programs pop up, they pop up. And they now realize that that's not the way to go. But we felt that putting together the elements and the steps in place to do an annual plan would be worthwhile. We also wanted to develop a level of trust within the parish that what we say we're going to do, we indeed did. And after you go through a few cycles in that, people within the parish will begin to increase their believability of leadership. And again, that impacts this notion of a healthy parish and also this confidence in leadership, which will directly input or impact stewardship as well. So we have the 1-year plan, which is the operating plan. We also have another one which gets confused many times. That's a capital campaign. A strategic plan is not a capital campaign, nor is a capital campaign an operations plan. Capital campaign is focused in on capital improvements, typically identified as refurbishment of buildings, improvements to the grounds, building a new structure on site, or in some cases actually building the church for the first time or identifying another location to relocate an existing parish. In one conversation with a priest who wanted a strategic plan, I asked him what was the intent? Why did he want to do this? And he said, well, we need our parking lot paved and we have to paint our buildings. I said, well, okay, that's not a strategic plan. And his retort was, yes, but we have to think about this strategically. So he was kind of mixing the adverbs with the nouns, and I said, yes, you do need to think strategically in how you're going to raise the money, but it is a very focused campaign which has different attributes than a strategic plan. And again, I can go through some of those differences if you wish, but just know from a definitional standpoint, there's operating plans, there's capital campaigns, and there's strategic plans. Again, strategic plans focused in on that 36 to 48 month window. In addition, a strategic plan is going to be looking at all the elements of a parish. It's going to be starting from a blank sheet of paper and saying, what do we have here? And again, going back to the why is, why does our parish exist? And then beginning to put in vision of what do we want to become. So I'll get more into that in a little bit. The next question is, isn't this just for business and not a church? Very, very common question. And this is where a point of confusion comes in. And having been a parish council, I'm in my 14th year now as a parish council president at my current parish, not all consecutively, because I'd be violating the parish regulations with that, but that was over a 20-year window. When someone says that churches that the parish councils are responsible for running the business of the church, I honestly tend to bristle at that because the church is not a business. The church is a church, and a business is a business. And we do bring our business skills, our business gifts that we have honed outside the church in order to do his work. And so that's the first definition, is we separate out this notion of business or a church and understand the differences. But the Bible is full of examples of where putting a good plan in place worked. We have Noah, 120 days to build an ark. We have Nehemiah rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem in 52 days. We have David and Solomon. David wanted to rebuild the temple, to build the temple, but was unable to, or not enabled to, and developed the plans and gave those to Solomon to build the temple off of those plans. St. Paul, when he went out, he was very selective and knowledgeable about the areas of the world he went to, selecting Ephesus, the gateway to Asia Minor, as a key location. Even Jesus, Christ had a plan. He recruited leadership. He developed them, and he sent them to the ends of the earth in Acts 1:8 to preach and to establish churches. So there was a plan, and the underpinning behind all that is the understanding that God works through his people, that he gives us the gifts to be, again, good stewards of what he's given us, and to use our skills, to use those business skills within the context of the church. So is this for just business, not a church? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, in Proverbs 29:18, we talk about where there is no vision, people perish. And there are parishes having difficulty. Not to say a plan is going to be a fix-it for everything, but certainly it can be a pathway forward if parishes are having some difficulty. The next key question is, what does the plan include and how does it connect to all the other work of the parish. Think of a parish as a spider web. Now, first of all, we are all connected through the Eucharist. We know that. Think of that middle layer that I mentioned previously in terms of the what. And we start to list all of our different programs. And think of all those on a spider web. And as I took my grandson out this last summer when he was 6 and looked at the rather huge spider web that was in our front yard with a rather huge garden spider in the middle of it, I showed him how the web moved, and we threw little leaves and pieces of twig onto the spider web to see how the entire spider web was connected. Exactly the same thing for our parishes. Our parishes will have youth programs that will impact our senior programs, could impact our religious education and Sunday school programs, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an understanding that these programs are all connected in some way, again, to bring people closer to God. And if we understand those points of connection and understand what those programs are, then we can more fully put together a plan. So we do some understanding as well up front about what are the programs that are out there and doing a health check on each one of those. How effective are they? One of the things on a strategic plan, I do want to emphasize at this point as well, is that there's something that a strategic plan is not. And a strategic plan is not a performance evaluation on any of the parishioners. The role of a parish is never to shame anyone. And we obviously want to demonstrate love in everything that we do. So from the perspective of looking at programs, sometimes people are very fixed to the programs that they serve. For example, how do you effectively say our church school program or Sunday school program is not effective when you've had the same director of your Sunday school for the last 25 years? It can become very personal. So there's a lot of awareness and understanding, and I'll say loving kindness that goes into the development of a strategic plan within a church. In a business setting, you may not see that. In a business setting, they may turn into performance evaluations. And that's a very strong distinction that we have to be aware of when we're doing a strategic plan. How long does it take to develop a plan? Absolutely varies. Could take as quick as 4 months and as long as 18 months. What I'd like to do is, I'm gonna jump ahead to the next slide, or could you jump ahead, Stacey, to the next slide?
Will do.
To illustrate this point. So if you look at the plan development, I apologize for those that are on a listen-only mode at this point, but I will tell you what we're looking at. So it's the plan development phased steps of putting together a plan. So it starts with the beginning. It goes begin, assess, envision, plan, implement, and manage. And these are the 6 major categories of a strategic plan development. So if you look at, again, I apologize if you're calling in, but for those that can see the chart, as we get into the envision state, in the assess state, there's an area there identified SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And that's that opportunity to look at all the different ministries and programs and services that the parish provides and do a hard assessment on its effectiveness. And then to be able to prioritize direction. And we look at, again, everything. We also look at the culture of the parish to see, you know, if like most parishes, we say, we're a friendly church, you know, are we really? Case in point, one parish I worked with said one of their key strengths was being friendly. Okay, that's great. When I pulled up to the church one Sunday morning to attend liturgy for the first time, I noticed that, and I've been in many Orthodox churches, I really didn't have an idea where the front door was because it was a rather unique property. And then that door was this 12-foot oak dark wood door that had nobody standing next to it. You didn't know really what was behind it, and that was the front door. And to top it off, it even creaked when you opened it. And I said, yeah, you know, you're friendly, but boy, I tell you, you got to get over some barriers here before you can enjoy that friendliness. And so we challenge some of these elements as well, just with some basic observations. So we'll be looking at all these different programs. These are the steps that a parish typically takes, and the reason some go from 4 months to 18 months, that many times parishes have some of these elements already in place, and so they don't have to be created. When I talk about 18 months, first of all, the longest one I've ever done is 14 months. And that was the blank sheet of paper right from the beginning, saying, let's go through every step. They had not done an assessment. They had not done a health check. They had not done a SWOT analysis in their parish. They had never done a strategic plan. They did not have a mission, vision, or core values identified. So all of that was created new. And this was for a parish, by the way. They just celebrated their 100th anniversary. So one of the key elements on this as well is that these steps that you're looking at or you're hearing apply to every parish, regardless of size, regardless of how long the parish has been in existence. If you do a plan, you will do all of these steps. We may re-sequence them because in some cases the work has already been done. For example, a parish I just recently did, we did a plan in about 6 months. Why was that short? Well, they had already had a mission, vision, value statements that they've been using for a number of years. So we just went and revisited those and made some modifications. So that shortened the timeline. They had conducted a SWOT analysis and a parish survey to garner perspectives on the parish within a reasonable amount of time. They did it about 2 years prior, but upon review, the findings were felt to be very valid. So we didn't do a parish survey. We didn't do a SWOT analysis. So that enabled us to move much more quickly into the plan development. So it was more a fact of not new generation, it was review and communication of what the outcomes were. So that shortened the sequence. There's also the uniqueness of doing a strategic plan within a Greek Orthodox church. And so when we put together timelines, for example, this parish that took about 14 months, we need to understand that during their entire Greek festival and the preparations that led up to it, there was no strategic plan development going on. So that took 6 weeks off the schedule. And then, you know, August came. We lost another 4 or 5 weeks during August because no one was around. You know, and then certainly during Lent and Pascha, that's another period which you know, most of our planning efforts were put on the shelf. So really think about it. We took effectively 4 months out of that equation just because of parish life, and that's a reality as well. And then our chairperson unfortunately became ill, and so that slowed us down a little bit more. And those are the realities of putting together a plan. So as a matter of fact, again, this parish I just visited in the desert in Arizona last weekend, they do want to do that's another one that wants to do a 1-year plan. And they basically said this has to be done, most of it has to be done before the end of May in terms of mission, vision, and vision, which is also in that plan, because everyone leaves the state for June, July, and August, and really doesn't come back again until the end of September. So there's, again, all variables. Every one of your parishes out there has uniqueness about it, and the plan really does need to be tailored to the uniqueness of your parish. Again, you're eventually going to do all these things, whether you know it or not, as you develop your strategic plan. Also, I think it's extremely important to point out that this 6-step process, again, begin, assess, envision, plan, implement, and manage. You'll notice that actually developing the plan is only the 4th step. If you want to develop a plan, have it look good, tell people that you have it, and then put it on the shelf, that is not the intent of a strategic plan. And that will actually hurt the parish significantly in the mid to long range. One of the things that we discuss at the beginning with the planning team is, are you committed to the implementation of this plan? And the entire time that this plan is being developed, we're thinking about implementation and we're thinking about management. So we make statements as we're giving updates to the parish or to the General Assembly. We're making statements that says, when this plan is created, the leadership team of the parish has an obligation and is willing to fulfill this obligation to give updates on every General Assembly between now and the end of this planning period, which again could be 3 to 4 years from now. That the parish council has made a commitment. They will review this document in its entirety and depth every year via a parish council retreat or a specified meeting to go through the objectives, the goals, and the timelines and the costs. So if there's not that commitment, my advice to a parish is don't do it. Go to a shorter plan that you can manage. In addition, many people, when they hear the term strategic plan, may react negatively. They may, and we're kind of getting to this, what can derail the planning process. But what can happen in that case is what they hear is strategic plan, but what they're really sensing is that change is on the forefront. And people, for the most part, when they hear this notion of change, will dig their heels in a little bit, be a little more skeptical. People typically react to change first with resistance prior to acceptance. And so it's extremely important up front in the beginning. Again, apologize for those that can't see it, but we have the rationale for the plan. The rationale is for the planning effort is built up front, and that will, if you will, from a business perspective, that term is the value proposition. But what is our value proposition? Why are we doing this? Why are we going to be expending our own time and maybe even some of the financial resources of the parish to create this plan? And so that rationale has to be bold. It has to be meaningful to the parish, and it has to be able to be short enough to be articulated quickly and easily for understanding. And you want people to rally behind it. So that's why we do some of the health check elements up front to identify what the purpose is for this planning process. And so we get to the implementation, and then finally the managing, which is the managing long-term on a regular basis on how to manage the process.
Steve, I'm going to interject a quick second with a question about, have you found that there is a sweet spot in terms of the amount of time it takes to go through those 6 steps from begin to manage in a parish? Meaning, if it goes longer than a certain number of months, is there a loss of focus or a loss of interest? Is it best to try to get it done in a window of time that is a certain number of months?
Great question. I would shoot for 6 months, but one of the key components for this planning process is a very strong communications effort. So while the plan itself may take 6, ideally, but it could go to 8, 9 months. Again, the other case, it was 14 months. There was a constant thread of communications going out, informing the parish of what was going on. So for example, this one parish that had the 14 months, we spent 6 weeks soliciting input from the parishioners through a formal online parish survey, to small group discussions, through ministry discussions, and we constantly were giving updates, not on our findings, but just on the process. We had another 2 ministry meetings this week. We had a coffee hour breakouts. One parish did a penny for your thoughts luncheon, where people came in, if they dropped a penny in the bucket, they got to have a free lunch, and then they broke them into groups. to give their ideas and thoughts on the parish. There's some fun things that can be done. But I think, Stacy, the key on this is that there's a constant flow of steady communications informing people that it is alive, that it doesn't go dormant. Now, part of the challenge that I've seen in other cases is when you have a Greek festival and a plan really does kind of become dormant from a parish perspective. We can put together plans that during that period, more analysis is done. Maybe you're going out and benchmarking, maybe you're going out and reconciling the survey results, things that can be done behind the scenes so you're not losing all that time frame of touch points.
Sure.
The other thing which is extremely important is this notion of conciliarity, that you want, and the term I use is fingerprints. You want as many fingerprints on the plan as possible. And that gets into one of the questions, I think it's down here, of how many people does it take to do a plan, or who creates the plan, or few or many, question number 6. The more the merrier. If you're putting together a change strategy, which again, I alluded to the fact that a strategic plan is, then what you want to be thinking about as you're developing that plan, you want to be thinking about implementation simultaneously. And one of the best ways to lower resistance and increase acceptance of a plan is to have perspectives from the many in the plan itself. So again, parish surveys, small meeting groups, etc. It allows everyone to have a voice. And so when the plan is created, you can point to the fact that, if the parish has 120 stewards, that 80 of those families, and actually more than that because you'll have husbands and wives, but X amount of parishioners, which represents 75% of our parish, actually participated in this plan development by sharing their perspectives, sharing their ideas. When I've attended General Assemblies, we've been very fortunate to have 100% acceptance at every General Assembly that we've done. And it's for that reason. It's because we can say with confidence that this plan represents a majority viewpoint in the parish. In addition, if there are groups that you think might be objecting to this plan, you can get with them ahead of time because you understand what their concerns are, and you can address those concerns outside of a large General Assembly meeting. So those are some of the keys on that. The other thing too, not to belabor it, but from a change perspective, building momentum and maintaining speed is the best way to implement change. The longer it drags on, Stacy, to your question, then the more energies wane, and it's harder to build that momentum again. So you want to build and sustain the momentum as you're going through all of these steps. And again, reporting out progress all along the way. That answer your question, Stacy?
It absolutely does, and it fits well with a lot of the parishes that I work with in terms of just stewardship plans. Mm-hmm. More ministry leaders, more parish leaders involved, the better, because as you go out and say, this is our mission and our vision for the parish, you can show your inclusivity.
Yeah, absolutely.
By inviting the head of every ministry within the parish as well as parish council to participate. So yeah, that absolutely answers the.
Yeah, good.
I don't know if you saw in your chat, there was a question about whether or not St. Paul, your parish, developed your own survey or used an existing one in your strategic planning process.
We created our own. Not to say, and I created it. I actually led the planning process at St. Paul's for the 2 plans that we've done. So you can run your own plans. You don't always have to bring in someone from the outside. But that was based on a lot of review of existing plans out there. those of you that have been involved in maybe employee surveys in a business setting and gotten those results, or HR setting, you'll find that many times surveys create more questions than you started with. The first time out will be, let's look at these areas. How do people think about stewardship? How often do they give? What format do they like to give? Do they want to start giving electronically? Those sort of things. But then you'll have, once you get the results, you'll say, oh, yeah, that question on electronic giving, is it more age-based? And if you don't ask those questions or formulate them, then you're never going to know. So sometimes you have to go out and do follow-up questions. But the answer is most parishes create their own because every parish is similar yet different. I heard Stacy shared with me the snowflake analogy the other day, and that's exactly a parish. So there are a number of church surveys out there one could look at. Caution when you start to look, not a caution, just an observation. When you start to look at Protestant surveys, they will go deeper into worship. Do they want praise bands? Do they want television screens? Obviously, doesn't pertain to us, but they usually have some very good questions on their ministries and what they want out of their ministries. So I encourage other surveys to be looked at, but we also have samples. I have samples of surveys that I can share as well.
I was going to say, I just looked in my email, Steve, and found one you sent me on February 7th for St. Paul's. Do you mind? I didn't share that with the group. Do you mind if I do?
These are God's gifts, not Steve's. So share them with anyone.
Thank you. I will email that to everybody in not only our group today, but in the group at large. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
And then, there are little lessons learned on surveys as well. We can spend more time on that, but, they just need to be easy to use. And again, they always take a survey always takes longer than anticipated. I'll just warn you right now. The 6 weeks that we spent at this one parish, they never would have thought that it would have taken that long. But they wanted to be very inclusive. So a couple of the weeks, they actually set up laptops in the church hall. And for their older parishioners that maybe weren't adept on using computers, they actually proctored that survey for them, sitting down and either showing the person what buttons to push or sitting down with them and answering the question. And also language came into play as well. Do we do them in Greek and English? Some are pan-Orthodox. One parish was, do we do it in English, Greek, and Ethiopian, which we didn't do. So there are other little subtleties that pop up from time to time as well. Yeah. I see. Do we have another question here?
Yes. So St. Paul Irvine, where Steve is, the strategic plan was approved in June 2014. The question is, how has it worked since then? If you can elucidate on that a little bit.
Oh, exceptionally well. How else could it do? It's gone really well, actually. Not kidding aside. We take the strategic plan very seriously. And so we use this as a guide. We do report against it every General Assembly. We do parish council retreats once a year, where we take out the plan and we look at it. One of the things that really guided our development was the area on buildings and building development. There was an original plan that was created in the late 1980s, which was a master plan for our property. And in 2014, we completed our second strategic plan. The first one was created in 1993, and 1998, and I led that one as well. And so what we did was we took that master plan and we sequenced it. In the first strategic plan, we revisited it, and the second strategic plan, we presented that resequencing again. And one of the things that was most interesting to us is in the plan, we had two major steps to go. One was adding additional iconography within the sanctuary, and the other one was building a 13,000 square foot parish event center. And honestly, I didn't know which way it would go in terms of, you know, should we alter the sequencing? What should come first? That sort of thing. So in our parish survey, we actually posed that question to the parish, which should come first? And iconography actually won out by a small victory, if you will, but it was about 52 to 48% saying we needed to complete iconography in the church. And everything we do is mosaic in the church. So it was fairly costly. But what we did do is, since it was so close, we decided to combine capital campaigns and into a one master campaign. So in effect, we ended up doing them both, but the iconography from a calendar standpoint went in first, because that's what the parish wanted and voted on. And when we got to the General Assembly, there were a few questions about why are we having iconography first? If you build the center first, you could rent it out, generate income, which would pay for the iconography. Valid. But the response was over 283 parishioners had input on that question. And as a collective body, that's what we all said. At that point, the individuals say, I acquiesce to the parish, and there was no debate, there was no issue at all. So that worked out very well, both illustrating how we use the survey findings to guide our strategy. And on February 3rd of this month, a few weeks ago, we actually officially opened up our parish event center, and with our first fundraising gala, our first major event that we had in our grand opening, if you will. So that's up and operational, and all the iconography was ready by last Pascha as well. So we're able to guide ours. And then most importantly, our ministries are focused. You can always use a little improvements here and there, obviously, from a continuous improvement standpoint, but our ministries, we think, are very solid as well.
Excellent.
Thank God. Yeah.
Excellent.
Other question?
No, you know what? I put out a chat question asking how many parishes represented on the call were working off of a strategic plan or have a long-range planning committee. So that's Akron, Ohio, St. John the Divine, and Wheeling have responded so far. I was just curious, more than anything.
You know,
a lot of parishes have long-range planning committees.
Sure.
That don't necessarily do a lot. Or maybe that's just my own parish that I'm reflecting there. But I was just curious because it's not something we've talked about, to be honest.
One of the things that, that's very helpful, Stacy, thank you. And I would love to see anybody's plans. One of the things that I'm going to be doing, and I have a meeting in April of this year to talk to, many of you might know Bill Marianas. Bill is an individual down in Atlanta, he's just wonderful in this space. And Bill has a lot of resources, and Bill and I have known each other for quite a few years. Bill and I are going to sit down and see how we can be more effective in sharing materials, not only with ourselves, but with the entire United States. So one of my to-dos is to create a specific website for the metropolis of San Francisco. But once you have a website, it's not going to be password protected. It'll be open to anyone. That we can begin to collect samples of strategic plans out there and surveys that parishes are willing to share, and we'll put together a process from a qualitative standpoint to make sure that they're kind of the right plans that could be used as an example. But we do want to make it very easy for a parish to get their hands on existing plans, existing tools, approaches, that sort of thing. So if they do want to develop their own plans, it'll only be a matter of clicks away before they can get to an approach and then work out a process to avail ourselves to answer questions or whatever the case might be. That's probably a little bit harder, but we want to go in that direction. And we've also had some conversations with similar individuals in other Orthodox jurisdictions that similarly are interested in sharing their work with us and our work with them. So hopefully in another year from now, we'll be able to tell the story about where the materials are and how to get to them. And that would be not only for strategic planning, that would also be for leader development as well.
Okay. I just sent to the group on the call your email. John in Akron, I believe, has a plan he wants to share with you. And somebody else has asked if they can contact you with additional questions. I probably should have asked first, but I guess I'll ask forgiveness instead of permission to have shared your email address with everyone.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Just real quick for the group, we're coming up on about an hour since we started. I'm always mindful of people's time. Is there anybody who wants to ask a question that has to leave the call? Steve, I don't want to cut you off at all from what you're doing. If you want to, if you've got more and you want to finish, but I just want to acknowledge the fact that we're at that hour mark, and we can go from there. But if there's anybody that has questions, feel free to send them to me by chat or whatever they would like.
Okay. I'll just touch on, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time here, so thank you. And I'm fine with my own time for another half hour or so. Hey, it's only 2:30 in the afternoon out here, so I could go a long time.
Right.
The couple other points. What's it cost to develop a plan? The cost can be nearly zero if you're doing it internally and with volunteers. When we did St. Paul's, it was, one SurveyMonkey account and some printing costs for the final booklets. But beyond that, it was all volunteer driven. I've seen proposals from outside organizations in the area of as high as $30,000 to $40,000 for a parish. And I realize that rules out most parishes. So it really goes from $0 to $40,000. I would say, in the ballpark, if you're going to bring in an outside consultant to do something like this, I think a reasonable cost would be, and again, to program manage the whole thing, would probably run in the ballpark of $15,000 to $25,000. Would probably be a good price range to target, and I think you can get some very good resources there. And then one of the things as well, one of the key lessons learned is if you do bring in a group from the outside, you still need that parish champion, that person within your parish, not the priest, because he will have to be involved in this process very intimately. But a parishioner who is willing to be the point person for the parish, because that person will give it internal credibility. And there's just a lot of things to do in terms of communication or alignment or whatever the case might be that need to be done. So that's a real important point as well. The question is, last time we did this, nothing happened. Why do it again? I have spoken to a couple of parishes that had that almost exact quote. And the reality is that they were, again, committed to developing a plan, a 4-step process, not a 6-step process. And so we talked about change management and those elements. So from that perspective, you have to be, all in to do the entire process, not just develop a plan. As a matter of fact, what many of you may have found if you've been involved in strategic planning is as teams begin to develop, and I call them visioning teams or development teams, that actually put together the meat on the structure of the plan, you'll find that many of these teams immediately want to start implementing. They'll have a good idea and they'll just walk out of a meeting and start implementing, which is good and bad, depending on what it might be. But again, that is a positive, real positive affirmation of momentum, that they just want to keep it going and see results quickly. So I applaud that. And finally, what can derail the planning process? A couple of things. One is time. If it, as we talked about, if it takes too long, people will lose interest, the momentum will wane. The other one is status quo. Those of you that are familiar with change management principles, is that status quo is your biggest enemy. And the question that has to be asked is, do the memories of yesterday outweigh the hope for the future? And if you have, especially in a very, with a parish with long tenure, remember the good old days, and the good old days could be 5 years ago, they could be 40 years ago. But that remember the good old days should be acknowledged and should be identified as attributes that if we're not doing it today, what's preventing us? But it shouldn't be a parachute that slows us down, that says, we're just not going to move forward, and we're going to be stuck in the past, if you will. That will be a major issue to go through. And so that's why the rationale up front of why we're doing a plan and creating this momentum is so vitally important to move through that. The other one, and I hate to say this, is ego, is that people on development teams or even on a core team could be so fixed on their own notion of what to do with, and I hate to say this, with their ministry, that they become rigid and not open for ideas. And it's, as Ken Blanchard of the 1 Minute Manager fame, who is very Christian and runs a Christian consulting organization now, uses, ego as edging God out, right? That we want our plans in place. It's my ministry. And that gets right back to the why. Again, why do we have a parish? Parish is there, to get closer to God and be effective stewards of His gifts. So as long as we approach this notion that, again, all is His and we are just trying to manage and make those more useful, then ego will be managed that way as well. So that's why we want to build in those good positive messages and alignment up front, so we don't have to deal with the ego a little bit later. And there may be there will be some situations that come up from time to time, but if you can reinforce that message, that actually diminishes it. And then finally, the last one, which is I've not seen a lot of, is distractions. Stewardship numbers drop all of a sudden, and so all the resources get marshaled over there, or other things happen in the parish. One case, there was one parish right in the middle of the strategic planning process. One of their long time donors passed away, who was very well known throughout the United States, and so they had to do this quite elaborate series of plans for this individual's funeral. And those sort of things. So distractions happen, and when you get through them, you rev up the momentum again and get moving again. So that happens from time to time as well. With that, that's really all my formal comments. And if I can answer any questions, I'll be happy to. Or if anybody has any questions, they can certainly send me an email. I'll be happy to answer it that way as well.
Okay. Yeah, I've shared your email with everybody, and I don't see any additional questions at the present time. I'm going to ask one, Steve, real quick, and that's how, because I have a feeling from my work with parishes on stewardship, outreach, evangelism, sometimes they look at it as, this is a huge undertaking. So I guess, and maybe
great question.
I missed this, but I mean, how do you reduce the elephant to palatable bites so that it doesn't feel so ominous and difficult in that regard?
Yeah, great question. I apologize. I should have hit on that.
Yeah.
A strategic plan can be a few pages. It can be 40 pages. It can be focusing in on 3 key elements that the parish wants to focus in on over a 24-month window, if those are the right elements. It doesn't have to be a lot of make work type of things. Actually, I just looked at a strategic plan 2 days ago that was about 3 pages, and that was it.
Wow.
So it's really upfront, keeping the team small. Typically, you'll have 3 to 4 people as part of an executive steering committee, and then they'll work on that first step of begin, building the rationale and really envisioning what they would see this planning process being. And then that group will branch out and add a strategic planning committee that can range anywhere from half a dozen to a dozen people. I wouldn't go beyond that. But to your point, Stacy, that group can be pretty small as well. And a smaller parish, it will be, because just from a percentage perspective.
Sure.
But up front, the team can determine how elaborate they want to get. One of the ways to eat the elephant in smaller bites is to do a 1-year plan. And just focus in on that, and then see how that goes for you. And then you'll actually take elements of that first year plan. And I have it's about a 10-step process on how to take a parish from, the beginnings of mission vision all the way up to the presentation of a budget, a fully integrated budget, and at the General Assembly in the fall. And just use that as a guide and just kind of track right through it. And that will be a lot easier if you don't have formal planning experience to start with. Okay. Yeah. But don't think you have to do a 40-page color pamphlet. Now, I will say, however, that when a strategic plan is completed, it could look a lot like the ministry's handbook, which many people identify as a core of a stewardship program. Because the core of a stewardship program is to say, here are all the things that we offer, and here's how we want to use the gifts that are brought forward monetarily or time or skill-wise in order to fulfill these ministries. So you're going to see some uplift if you put more into your strategic planning document. You could even use that as part of your stewardship plan as well. And if you can go to the parish and say, here's our plan, here's where we're going, and here's what it's going to take to fund it through stewardship, because we do want to add more programs or whatever the case might be, then you have a basis of discussion going forward, as opposed to saying, we need your stewardship to keep the lights on, which I understand. Been president for a lot of years, and I've had those conversations as well. Is difficult. Those are difficult conversations to have, and difficult for people to buy into them.
Sure. Anybody else have anything for Steve that they'd like to ask? Well, I sent the survey via chat, but I will also send that by email. Y'all have Steve's email as well. And Steve, thank you for your time this afternoon. I sure appreciate it. I think it was anticipated by a lot of people to hear you talk, and I think you're going to be hearing from some of the folks on our call from the different parishes.
Happy to answer any questions. I want to thank you for the time. Obviously I have a passion on this topic, and I just love sharing examples of wonderful parishes out there that have taken this on. So thank you for the time today. I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Father George, will you close us with a prayer, please?
Yeah, let me unmute myself. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with all of us. Let us all go to love and serve the Lord.
Amen.
Amen.